Welcome everyone. In this first video, we're going to get started with blocking out our stylized skull. I'm going to bring up some of my reference that I collected online. After doing my research, I'm leaning towards these designs here from Coco. I like the stylization, the asymmetry, and the details of the different characters. I looked at various shape language and some of the more traditional Day of the Dead designs. I'm using PureRef to organize these and make them accessible to me while I'm sculpting. So we're going to hide Lightbox. Then we're going to navigate over here to Preferences, and we're going to load up a custom config file. So under Config, go ahead and open that and say Load UI. Once you have your config file in here, we can go ahead and get started. It's always good to use a custom user interface to speed up your workflow. If you're looking for ideas on how to set up a custom UI or you don't know how to do that, I would look at both Polygon as well as Shane Olson. Both of them have videos readily available out on YouTube that you can follow along and create your own user interface. So out here in our viewport, we're going to go ahead and come under Lightbox again and open up a Dynamesh 128Z project. I'm not going to save the one that was there. So that gives us the sphere. I'm going to turn off perspective as well as the floor. And to navigate in here, since we have a sphere right now, we're going to go ahead and load up our camera so we have a navigation point of reference. So under Cam View, go ahead and click that on. That brings up our navigation over here. If you hold down the Shift key, you can snap to the different views, the front and the side. And I'm going to turn on polyframe so you can take a look at the Dynamesh mesh here. You can see the polygons in here are not in a standard format, so this allows us to work in a more freestyle where we can pull the mesh around and it's more pliable. I'm just loading up the Skin Shade 4. Makes it a little bit brighter. I had the basic material on, but I'm going to go ahead and use the Skin Shade 4. You can find that under your materials right here, under Standard Materials, Skin Shade 4. So go ahead and put that on. That's the basic material over here. Okay, and I've got Polyframe on. That's why we're getting this orange color. Under Texture, I want to go ahead and load up my reference image. So I've got it under Coco Stills, and I'm just going to go ahead and I think work with Hector, at least for the start here. I'm going to use this for inspiration. I've got a few others out here that I'm looking at as well. So I've loaded that up under Texture, and now that it's there, we can see it. I can select it, and then I'm going to launch Spotlight. So Spotlight is going to place it out here, and I'm going to scale it down by just grabbing this and dialing it down counterclockwise, and then from the middle, I'm just going to drag it over here and dock it on the side. All right, so I just hit Z on the keyboard, and I also want to turn off Spotlight Projection. If I leave it on, you can see I'm trying to sculpt right here with the clay buildup, and it will not allow me to use any sculpting tools. Once I turn Spotlight Projection off, you can see that I can now sculpt. So make sure you've got Spotlight Projection turned off. And I'm going to use the Move tool, and I'm going to scale it up really large, bring the intensity down, and I'm going to start shaping this. So I've got the front view here. So right now I'm going to start pinching it in a little bit, turning it to the side, making this a little smaller. So I'm starting to form the back of the head as well as pulling out the jaw. Okay, and I've got some areas right here. That's from my Symmetry tool being on. So make sure you're in Symmetry. That's X on the keyboard. And I'm just smoothing out some of these areas just to keep it even while I'm working. I want to keep the mesh as clean as possible. So I'm back in the front view now. I'm going to start pinching in where the cheekbones are. And pulling those out and down. So I'm looking at the silhouette, trying to just block in these real basic shapes. And right now I'm actually just using my mouse. I'm not on the stylus yet. So for big moves like this, I try to keep it real simple here. I also try to look at all the different angles, make sure that I'm not just looking at one angle and not paying attention to the rest of it. So I'm getting the chin there, making sure it's rounded out here in the front. And now I'm just starting to pull the nose out. So I made the brush a little bit smaller, adding in a little bit of detail. And I'm going to start putting in the eye socket. So I've selected Inflate, and I'm holding down the Alt key, which does the opposite. So instead of inflating, it's deflating and hollowing out an area for the eye sockets. When the cursor goes blue, I'm holding down the Shift key and I'm smoothing out some of the areas inside here that are just getting a little lumpy. I want to keep things really consistent, really smooth. I don't want to introduce a bunch of uneven areas. So I'm just pulling up where the brows are. I'm actually using the Move tool now. I'm just sort of pushing in on the inside of the sockets, rounding those out, pulling down the cheekbone here. And I can see from this angle here, it's sort of hollowed out a little bit. I want to make sure that gets filled in. A little bit of lumpiness in there I'm getting rid of. Again, I'm rounding this area out. It's really important to kind of look down more at a kind of 3/4 top-down view to make sure that your face, the front of it, is not getting flat. It's very easy to just sort of use this as a 2D drawing tool and not come around to the different angles and make sure that you're capturing that roundness and that volume. So I'm working on the back of the jaw here, making my brush a little smaller. I'm just trying to capture some more detail. So I went from a really large brush and now I'm at a bit smaller brush. And I'm going to widen up the brows here. The back of the head. Okay, and I'm going to make the nose stick out a little bit more. And I'm trying to get that little point right there, the tip of the nose. I'm also smoothing that out, holding down the Shift key. So again, these are just the major landmarks that I'm marking in right now. And I'm working on the jaw now. So there's the back side of the jaw that I need to figure out. So these little points right here, they don't really come out, they go back. So I'm going to start pulling the jaw back here. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, so I want larger strokes. If I use a small brush, I'm going to introduce a bunch of uneven surfaces and have to come back and smooth out. So try to stick with the largest brush that you can get away with. And looking down here, I can see it's gotten a little flat. Smoothing that out. And I'm going to use the 3D CW pinch brush. And I'm going to start drawing in. I use this when I want to draw in and kind of mark some areas before I start sculpting them. So I'm just going to capture a little bit of the nose right here. So it pinches inward and I want to actually pull out. So I'm holding the Alt key down. That reverses the brush. So I've got like an edge going here, an edge up the nose. And these are a little sharp right now, but I'm sort of exaggerating. And that's the top of the mouth. And here's the bottom. So the mouth is going to be open. I'm going to hollow that out. And I'll probably make it a little bit larger. But I just want to draw in some of these big landmarks. And I'm just going around here with the brow. Again, this is more just sketching. I'll come back over this later on and either smooth it out or add to it. Select S for standard and then T, and that's going to bring up the standard brush. Now I'm actually starting to sculpt a little bit here. So using the standard brush, it will build up. And right now I want to just kind of brush out a little bit of the nose right there, and I'm going to carve in that hollowed out area. And this is where you can see that I'm not at a high enough resolution to really do this level of detail. You can see how ragged that looks and pixelated. I'm going to smooth it out. But again, I'm just kind of roughing in these areas. Smoothing out some of that, making my brush a little bit bigger, going back to the move brush and pulling out the head again, top part of the head, and then pushing up here on the back and the bottom. And again, it's getting a little wobbly looking, so I'm smoothing it, holding down the Shift key. You also notice that when I smooth it, it will shrink a little bit, so then I have to pull it back up again. Okay, so just narrowing this down a little more and pulling that jaw back. So at this point, I've kind of maxed this out, and what I'm going to do is make a duplicate. So under my subtools, you can see my polysphere that we started with. I'm going to duplicate it. So that's just going to copy it over. And I'm going to rename this. So this is going to be Zremesh, so I'm going to just indicate it with a Z underscore skull. And then I'm going to rename this one. This is my Dynamesh, so I'm going to put a D underscore skull. And this is just more for backup. I'm probably not going to come back to the Dynamesh one, but I'm just saving it off for now. In case something goes terribly bad and it crashes, I've got that there. So under Zremesh, we're going to run Zremesher on here. This is going to rebuild the topology. So right now you can see the Dynamesh topology is really dense. I'm going to click on this and it's running it. It's still a little dense too, and it's not the best outcome. I've got some areas with some stars and some uneven pulling down here on the chin. So I'm going to just smooth some of this out a little bit. This is probably going to be a couple different steps of doing the Zremesh until I get it right. I also need to, I think what I'm going to do is just actually project some of that information off of the Dynamesh. So projecting is a real common thing to do. So under project, I'm going to select all. So it's taking the higher definition off of the Zremeshed skull, and then I'm projecting it onto the Zremeshed one. So I'm dividing it and I'm building in those subdivision levels and capturing the detail off of the Dynamesh. So there's not a lot of detail in there. You can see that it brought in the nostril area. It also brought back in the mouth. And from here I can subdivide. I'm turning off my poly mesh. If I'm down here on 1, it's looking faceted, so that's coming in from the Zremesh process. And I can come over here and smooth this out. It gets a little tedious coming around here and doing this, so there's probably a better way of approaching this instead of holding down the Shift key. So I'm going to drag the history slider back to where we see that faceted area right there. And instead of doing the smoothing on it, I'm actually going to come down to, I'm on subdivision level 1. I'm going to click dynamic subdivisions, and then I'm going to apply it. So what that does is dynamic subdivisions is a preview of what it's going to look like once it is subdivided. You can actually work on it that way for a while too. In this case, I ended up accepting it, and that bakes it into that surface. So now I'm going to actually start sculpting. So I've got the clay buildup tool. You can see it's a little bit strong here. I'm actually still working with my mouse. I need to switch over. And so I've switched over to my stylus, and I'm just starting to, I think I want to go back to dots there. It was spraying. I didn't quite like that. So that's the alpha. The alpha controls the tip of your brush. So depending on what alpha you have on there, it will have a different feel to it. So I'm using dots. Usually I use dots or freehand. So I'm putting a little bit more detail in here. Again, I'm more sketching at this point, not quite sculpting, just adding a little bit of form in here, smoothing it down. And then this is the upper lip that I'm starting to sketch in, building that area up. This actually needs to be built up quite a bit. Got a little flat there. All right, so you can see the upper lip right there is starting to form. Okay, and now I'm actually holding down the Alt key and it's cutting away, so I'm still using the same brush, the clay buildup. It's now taking away, and I'm just undoing there and smoothing that out. It got a little uneven, so again, holding down the Alt key will produce the opposite of what the brush normally does. So in this case, it's eating away. And I'm just creating a mouth cavity and sizing my brush down. Just cleaning up that edge there. And you can see as I'm cutting into the mouth here, we're getting a lot of that pixelation. I just smoothed it out. At some point, I'm going to need to run Zremesher on it again so that we can build back the geometry. I'm using the move brush now to reshape the mouth and open it a little bit more, pulling out the upper lip. And I'm trying to push that area in for the mouth cavity. I'm going to push it back a little bit more, just holding down the Alt key using Inflate. And it's getting a little lumpy and uneven in there. I'm going to smooth that out. And I'm going to go ahead and size that down a little bit. My focal point, I'm going to bring that back up to 0. Shaping the lower lips right there. And I've got a little bit of a lump right there. So I'm trying to pinch the corners of the mouth together a little bit more. And the lower jaw is just a little wavy right there. So straightening that out, and I'm going to start forming the lower lip, kind of back inside the mouth here a little bit, fixing that. I'm just coming back here and revisiting the cheekbone. I just subdivided it, so I'm on subdivision level 2. Smoothing that out. Let's go ahead and save our file. So we can come under File and click Save As. That's going to bring up a window here. We've got some options down here, but we're looking at the .zpr, so that's a ZBrush project. I'm going to go ahead and save this out as skull_vo1, so version 1, and I'm going to add the .zpr. And I'm going to come under my Cocoa folder and I'm going to create another folder. This is going to be my ZBrush folder where I save my files. So I'm going to go in there and I've got it named and I'm going to click Save. So we'll come back in the next lesson and we'll begin working more on the secondary forms.